So, how did you transition into writing for The Simpsons? And did that in any way enhance, take away? Was it a challenge to your Jewish identity? I'd love to hear a little about that.
So I started writing for television. I got my first job on a writing staff on an HBO show, actually, when I
Hmm.
was 21. So it was really just like a tremendous blessing that I was able to graduate from college. I started writing comedy on the Harvard Lampoon. That was the comedy
Hmm.
magazine there, and the nation's oldest humor magazine. Actually, the National Lampoon, if you're familiar with that, was
Yeah,
founded
sure.
by people from the Harvard Lampoon.
Hmm.
So it had a big
What did, what
influence.
did what did you study? What was your major in Harvard?
I was a government major,
Uh huh.
and
Okay.
I thought I'd go to law school or something like that. A lot of people sort of like think maybe I wanted to be a writer my whole life and everything like that. And I was shocked to go into a creative field. I mean, it still sort of surprises me that I ended up making my career writing for television, writing comedy for television. I mean, that's so surprising compared to what I thought I was going to do.
I think I heard Conan O'Brien, who also went to Harvard, also wrote for The Simpsons, right?
Yeah,
Isn't that what
Conan
happened to him
actually
also?
was
Hmm.
staying in my apartment when he got his job on The Simpsons.
I'll get out of
And
here.
we were on the Lampoon together. And in fact, I just executive produced a show with him called
Hmm.
Final Space for Adult Swim and Netflix International, HBO Max. It was a sci-fi animated comedy drama space opera, but so I was working closely with Conan on that up until recently.
Wow. Oh, wow. He's I just think he's one of the funniest guys on the globe, on the
Yeah,
planet
and we knew it
rather.
back
And
then too. It was a shock to no one that he became, this
right,
superstar.
right. Wow. All right. So continue. You were saying about so you were writing for this HBO show, and how did that? How did you get into The Simpsons then? And what? How did that sort of jive or not jive with your Jewish trajectory of becoming more observant, more
Right.
connected Jewishly?
So I started writing professionally when I was 21,
Hmm.
and I think I got the job on The Simpsons when I was something like around 32.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
had been doing it for quite a while at that point. And the nature of just writing for TV is you kind of just, if you're lucky, you just kind of go from show to show. Because even a very successful show only lasted a certain number of seasons.
Right.
So you kind of go from show to show, which is what I did. And eventually, yeah, God smiled and I
Hmm.
ended up on The Simpsons, So
Wow.
that's
And was that during the same period of time that you were, starting to take your Judaism more seriously, or was that before or after? And was there
so
any
yeah. So
kind
I
of?
started keeping Shabbos when I was 24. So that was probably about 8 years into it at that point.
Hmm.
So I was had pretty much of a foundation at that
Hmm.
point, and it's always job to job. It's always interesting how people are going to react.
You
I
mean in your
remember
wo-
one
in
time. What's that?
mhm. No, please continue.
No, I was just saying. I remember like one time it was Tisha B'av, right? Which of course is our saddest day. So much destruction and tragedies happen on that day, and we don't sit in chairs until midday. In other words,
Hmm.
at midday, around 12 o'clock in the afternoon, approximately, sort of like the tone changes a little bit. It becomes a little bit lighter. You can sit in a chair. But I
Hmm.
remember showing up for work at The Simpsons, and it was Tisha B'av. You're allowed to work on that day. It's not ideal if you can take off. It's great, but if you have to work, you can work. And I didn't know what to do because I didn't want to sit in a chair. And so I remember just sitting on the floor of the writer's room
Wow.
and not explaining myself. And the head writer, who was someone who was brilliantly funny and just had just the sharpest wit, and it could be used for to decimate someone.
Right.
Um, saw me sitting on the floor by his desk without unexplained, and he didn't mention anything until about, I don't know, about half an hour into it, and he just kind
Hmm.
of looked at me and he said, "The Jewish thing?" And I nodded my head, and he was like,
Yeah,
and then he just nodded his head.
that's
I'll
it.
never
Right.
remember that. I'll never forget that. Just there was a certain compassion, a certain
Right.
respect, certain
Respect. Yeah.
acknowledgement that was not characteristic of how he treated things of that ilk,
Right.
and that made a big impression on me.
What was it apparent to others with whom you were working? Let's say at The Simpsons specifically, that you had become observant, that you had become religious. Like, did it come out in your writing at all, or was it difficult not to, sort of sneak some of that in to your writing on that show or other shows?
Yeah, so when it came lunchtime, we'd all eat together
Hmm.
and often work through lunch. And I'd order from a kosher restaurant.
Hmm.
So yeah, it was apparent every single day that that uh, that I kept Shabbos, that I kept kosher. I remember that it was a large room and there was one way out, and I sat on the furthest side of the room,
Hmm.
and so I had to walk by maybe 10 writers in order to get out the door. And so when it came time for leaving on Shabbos, these people, to be like a really good comedy writer, this isn't 100% of the time, but a lot of the time you really have to have like a finely tuned eye for hypocrisy in people and society, especially if you want to
Hmm.
write satire.
Hmm.
And you have to have like just this like bullseye kind of connection with destroying, exposing it and destroying hypocrisy.
Hmm. Hmm.
So anything that smacks of religion, is a prime target for this type of cynicism. You know what I'm saying? So a lot of environments you'll be in, and Shabbos is coming around, and people will be like, "Good Shabbos, good Shabbos." This was not that crowd. You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
Not
Right.
those people. And so when it came time for me to leave early on
Right.
Friday,
Yeah.
because of course that was part of my working arrangement with them, that I didn't work on Shabbos, which they honored again to their great credit. Um, I wouldn't want to make a big deal of it, so I would just stand up when it was time to leave, walk across the room, and I would go.
Right. Past the
Like
ten. Past the 10. Past the,
people
the 10 other
probably thought
writers.
that I was going to the bathroom, right? But I
Right.
never came back.
Right.
And so a year after I left the show, a year, I found out that I had a nickname. I didn't know it. And they told me that they called me the Invisible Jew. And why? How? Because at a certain point, they'd look to my seat to, get my feedback on something, and I wouldn't be there. And they'd like, "Did
Right.
you see him leave? I didn't see him leave. Next week, we're going to watch to see him leave." And then the
Right.
next week would come and say, "Did anyone see him? We didn't see him leave."
Were there any challenges? Were there any? I mean, it sounds like they were pretty tolerant and respectful. Um, I mean, was that generally the experience, or not always?
I mean, the real challenge that I experienced was not there. It was the first show that I was on where I tried to keep Shabbos,
Hmm.
and that was my first sitcom. So I was 24 at the time and had been writing for a little while, but for a lot of different reasons, I decided that I was ready to kind of take this thing which was very strong inside me and try to make it, you know, my reality, my
Hmm.
life. I just didn't want to keep this light inside of me anymore, keep it
Hmm.
trapped inside of me, um, which took a lot of courage, as people who have gone through that process know in their own life. And so I decided to do it. I had just gotten this job on this show. It was a comedy. It was called Women in Prison. And if that doesn't sound funny to you, America agreed. It was actually ranked. 99th out of 99 shows on primetime.
Okay, well, at
It was
least it
literally
made
the
it.
bottom rated show
It
on
was
television.
a top 100 though. You could still say that, no?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There were quite 100 shows on the air, but yes.
Right, right, okay.
And I, from naivete, I wasn't trying to pull anything or,
Mm.
be tricky or whatever. I had just been keeping Shabbos on my own. I was in between jobs at the time when I decided to start keeping Shabbos. And so I got this job with my then partner and who I had done all my writing with up until that point. We started writing pieces for the Lampoon together in college. And so I decided that, you know what, I'm keeping Shabbos now. And I didn't mention anything to the bosses when they hired me. And the first Friday came and there wasn't much to do. And it was in August anyway. So Shabbos comes in late, 7 p.m., whatever it is. So came and left, no problem. The second week I was there and, it was one of those meetings that seem like it's going to end, but you never know. Someone says, "Oh yeah, one more thing," and that could be another 20 minutes. And I'm literally sitting in front of this big picture window in front of this row of palm trees. It was very LA, and I'm watching the sunset in front of my face. And I lived a short drive from the studio, but it was like really starting to get tight, and I hadn't mentioned anything to my bosses about Shabbos. So I didn't really know what to do. And so I figured at a certain point that the only thing I could figure out was I just stood up and I left the room. And I
Wow.
never came back. And this, by the way, was where I learned that technique that I would later use on The Simpsons. Just sort of like stand
To,
up and walk out. And,
right, just
you can explain later.
right, the disappearing Jew.
Exactly. So
I,
anyway, I thought, so I can't go through this every week, and obviously, and so the next week I discussed it with my bosses, and I said, would it be okay for me to take off a little bit early on Friday to observe the Sabbath? And they were like, no, it's not all right. And had we known that you wanted to do this, we never would have hired you to begin with.
wow. So
And they
what
told
did
me
you
to
do?
think about it, but I didn't. My mind was made up, but they said think about it, and I didn't want to be confrontational with them, so I said, okay, I'll think about it. And anyway, my I would my my agent told me I'll never work in television again if I don't continue to work.
Hmm.
You know that phrase that you hear in old movies, you'll never work in this town again. I was like, wow, people actually say that.
Right.
And
Wow.
someone saying it to me. It was pretty wild.